In late 2014, a harassment campaign swept the online world, targeting women who spoke out against misogyny in the video games industry. This campaign, which reportedly started as a movement about ethics in video games journalism and quickly devolved into a coordinated attack, is known as Gamergate. And it's still one of the most controversial topics in the gaming space to date. At the time, Gamergaters claimed they were the vanguards of ethical gaming journalism, fighting to quote unquote expose corruption by any means necessary, while critics of the movement believed that Gamergaters used that ideology as an excuse to justify harassing women and progressive voices in gaming. Regardless, many high-profile women in gaming received incessant abuse both on and offline, including serious threats against their safety, even resulting in an FBI investigation into some of these attacks. 10 years on, the impact of this movement is still felt throughout the industry, and some believe we are now on the precipice of a Gamergate 2.0, a movement targeting the video game narrative development company Sweet Baby Inc. for pushing a quote-unquote woke agenda on the industry. Quote, this time, instead of assembling under the false banner of ethics in journalism, this new campaign has chosen wokeism and Sweet Baby as the focus of their grievances, writes Ash Parrish for The Verge. Quote, the result has been a wave of bigoted harassment targeting marginalized developers, journalists, and gamers. On social media, the employees of Sweet Baby are subject to a deluge of death threats. Developers who've spoken out in support of Sweet Baby are faced with similar treatment, with several making their accounts private in an attempt to stem the tide of abuse. Journalists reporting on the story have become subject to the same harassment they're covering. While the industry has certainly made strides in the last few decades, movements like Gamergate and now Gamergate 2.0 highlight the extent of the abuse that women and gender diverse people face for simply existing in an online space primarily built for white, cishet men. From Centennial World, welcome to Let the Girls Game, a podcast miniseries where we explore the history and stories of women in gaming, powered by Let's Sing. I'm your host, Lauren Meisner, and today we're exploring the harassment that women, girls, and gender diverse people face in the gaming space. Now, most of us are aware of how challenging things can be for women and gender diverse people in the video game space. So rather than dive into the darkness, the next two episodes will focus on how the industry got here and some of the positive steps happening in the space for women and gender diverse people. And to help me unpack that, I am joined for the next two episodes by Dr. Mahli-Ann Butt and Dr. Lucy Sparrow, who are both digital culture experts and researchers in the gaming industry. Thank you so much, Dr. Mahli-Ann and Dr. Lucy, for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us, Lauren.
Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to chat with you both about your research and your experience in this industry. So, first, could you both give us a little insight into your career and how you came to specialize in your respective fields?
Absolutely. So, we're both game studies academics. I'm housed in cultural studies, and I generally research questions around diversity in games and games cultures and industries. I came to game studies to the Digital Games Research Association of Australia conference back in 2013 or 14, and it just felt like home. I have to admit, it was just felt really supportive, really great community. 10 years later, I'm now the president of DIGRA Australia, and so it's been a real honour to serve the game studies academic community of Australia here. I'm a lecturer in cultural studies at the University of Melbourne, where Lucy is also as well, but in a different part of the university.
Yeah, so I am in human computer interaction, and my research mainly looks at basically the ethics of multiplayer gaming. And so, what that means is I'm interested in looking at what people think is right or wrong in these kinds of digital playful spaces, and also how we can design these spaces in ethical ways. I came to this work, I mean, basically because I love games and I love research, and I thought bringing them together would be a really fun thing to do. And I was right.
That's awesome. So I understand that you are both collaborating together on a project about AI. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so AI Ally is a project that we've started up at the University of Melbourne. It's funded by the e-safety commissioner from the Australian government. And basically, we're looking to develop an AI application that helps to intervene into online harassment and online abuse, particularly for girls, women, and gender diverse individuals. So, the idea of AI Ally is that it's kind of like a friend you can add on social media that will act like an upstander or an active bystander. So, it will intervene into situations of online harassment. That involves detecting the harassment and then responding in a particular way. We have yet to determine exactly the functions it will perform, but because and that's partly because we're going to be co-designing that with actual participants that we're hoping to get more of. But potential options would be things like helping people to create reports, to document the harassment, or to connect them with a support network. These are the kinds of things we're looking at.
That sounds awesome. So obviously, there's been I suppose, cultural issue in the gaming industry around gender based harassment, and Gamergate is an extreme example of that. But could you speak to what has led to this culture? If there's any specific moments, or if it's just kind of a general sentiment, what have you found?
So Gamergate intensified problems, as you said, that were already there, and it brought it to a wider mainstream audience with the news coverage that it had. But of course, these issues predate that. And we also see these issues across the internet, right? But particularly more so in really male dominated spaces or things seen as, a boys only club or something like that. But it goes back from the gendering of the medium itself. So originally, video games in the 70s weren't marketed towards boys or men. They were first marketed towards families. And then it wasn't until 1983, 1984, where there was a massive, what is known as the video game crash of 1983, or also known as the Atari shock in Japan. And so we saw this video game industry collapse by millions and millions of dollars, partly due to oversaturation of multiple consoles, having more of a bedroom coder culture where people were just kind of making games on the fly. And then it kind of shifted where people needed to be more risk averse. And this is where things like Nintendo came in with the seal of excellence quality, and marketing was now allowed for children in the 80s. And so they went along where this is, I guess, like a crash course of the history.
No, I love that.
um, and like other kind of technologies, when they entered the home, like the microwave, part of the marketing for it would become gendered in one way or another. Like television shows became a bit more feminized, the same way that microwaves were also feminized. And so the role of computers entering the home, at first, people weren't really sure, and then pinged on to the fact that getting people to buy computers to play video games was a really good way to market them. And that's where it comes into being marketed towards boys. And then we see the term gamer appear in video game magazines in the late 80s, and the idea of a hardcore gamer that's kind of hyper masculine, kind of trying to push away from the uncool parent figure. And so that's kind of how we have this idea of what a gamer is becomes constructed by the industry itself. And that is perpetuated through the late 80s, through the 90s, and we still have that persistent image of the gamer identity today. But of course, the problems have not gone away, right? We saw Sweet Baby Inc. and the controversy around that and the attempts of a Gamergate 2.0 earlier this year. So even 10 years on, there's still persistent ideas that gaming is meant to be this masculine dominated space. So women and gender diverse people seeing as intruders or invaders into their space, therefore being allowed for these, self identifying as true gamers or to kind of defend what they view to be the correct way to game.
I actually wanted to circle back a bit to your point on labels because I was reading through some of your dissertation and I was really interested in the section that you had on labels and the concept of a gamer and how there's a lot of modern quote unquote gamers or people that play games that are trying to redefine that label or move away from that label. Could you speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, so in my dissertation, I coined the term the post-gamer turn, pretty much to give an overview or make note of the tensions between the gamer identity, that is the constructed audience, versus the practice of playing games. So the term player in itself is already somewhat more inclusive because it pretty much just describes anyone who plays games. Since the gamer identity was constructed, you see these tensions and pushes and pulls between that kind of dominant public versus the counter publics who have always played games and who have always been there, who are kind of saying like, "Hey, we play too. Um, we've always been here." And then becoming more visible in the last decade or so. I guess the best way to kind of capture this is this anecdote that I like to say. So, as much as those who may identify as gamers or who could easily represent gamers, I think our distance or wanting to push away from it is also really important to understand the culture of games. So I used to work at EB Games and I was standing in uniform behind the counter. And a guy walks up to me and asks, "But do you really play video games?" And I go, "No, I just work here." And just, like kind of, come on. My boss came along and had to kind of clarify, being like, "No, no, no, she's a real nerd. She's a big, big nerd. She totally plays video games." So I think it's like, it's very, very common, and Adrienne Shaw's work has really great research onto this, particularly her paper, "Do You Identify as a Gamer?" And what she found is that those who were women or gender diverse were least likely to identify as gamers because the gamer identity, that what we have in our head, makes them feel like this idea of being like a well-rounded woman in society doesn't fit just being a gamer, which is you must just play games and nothing else, or other kinds of complicated relationships, or feeling like that identity doesn't fit for them. And we see this replicated across social media, not just in gaming, right? Where how the internet itself was constructed and seen as perhaps a genderless utopia from the 90s also kind of means that whenever people wanted to speak about their own gender, it was seen as making it about gender rather than just talking about their own experiences. And the default was always assumed to be generally white, male, straight. So, in talking about anything or just being anything else would get backlash for making it political way of being.
Thank you so much to Dr. Mahli-Ann and Dr. Lucy for joining me. Thank you to Let's Sing for powering this mini series. Tune in next week for part 2 of this interview, where we discuss the path forward in combating harassment against women and gender diverse people in the gaming industry and how AI might be the answer.